Have you ever wondered why some ancient names were whispered only in the deepest temples, never spoken aloud under the open sky? Why certain goddess statues were found with their faces deliberately carved away? Tonight, we descend into a myth so disturbing that the ancients themselves tried to erase it from memory. This is the story of a divine mother whose love became damnation, and a son whose beauty became his curse. But before we enter these forbidden waters together, if you dare walk deeper into the myths they buried beneath stone and silence, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear, the gods never wanted you to know.
This is not a tale of gleaming Olympus or heroic quests. This is the myth they buried beneath temple foundations, whispered only by the mad and the dying. The story of Cybele, the great mother whose maternal love twisted into something far more dangerous. Picture ancient Phrygia in what we now call Turkey, where mist curled through mountain temples like the breath of sleeping titans. Here, in sacred groves where no sunlight touched the ground, stood sanctuaries older than memory itself. The air was thick with incense and something else, something that made even the bravest pilgrims whisper their prayers. This was Cybele's domain, the great mother, the one who ruled over life, death, and the terrible space between them. Her temples weren't built for comfort or peace. They were carved into mountainsides like wounds in the earth, echoing with drums that beat like a cosmic heartbeat. But even goddesses, it seems, are not immune to the oldest curse of all, forbidden desire. They called her Cybele, though that name was itself a careful veil over something far more ancient and dangerous. She was the Phrygian mother of the gods, a primal nature goddess worshipped with orgiastic rites in the mountains, where her priests danced themselves into divine frenzy until their feet bled on the sacred stones. But here's what the temple inscriptions never recorded. Cybele wasn't just the mother of gods and mortals. She was the mother of obsession itself. Her love was like a mountain avalanche, protective and nurturing, until the moment it buried you alive. And then came the day she gave birth to the most beautiful being the world had ever seen. Her son, Attis. Attis grew up into a handsome young man. Some say that he was a shepherd, but handsome doesn't capture what he was. Imagine beauty so perfect, it made flowers turn toward him instead of the sun. Beauty that made even the mountain stones weep tears of morning dew when he passed. His mother watched him grow, and something in her divine heart began to change. The protective love of a mother slowly twisted into something darker, hungrier. She found herself studying the curve of his shoulders, the way moonlight caught in his hair. What happens when the line between maternal love and desire begins to blur? When a goddess realizes she's created the one thing in all existence she cannot live without, the answer would shake the foundations of heaven itself.
The night it happened, the very stars looked away. Cybele fell in love with Attis, and she made him promise that he would always be hers and never leave her. But this wasn't the innocent devotion of a mother to her child. This was possession in its purest, most terrifying form. In the sacred grove where no mortal foot had ever tread, the Great Mother claimed her son as lover. The earth itself shuddered. Trees withered and died in a perfect circle around them. The very air turned cold, as if nature itself recoiled from what it witnessed. But divine transgression always carries a price, and that price was about to come due. Here is where the story takes its cruelest turn. When Attis asked to marry a king's daughter, Cybele was enraged. Imagine the fury of a goddess scorned, but magnified by the twisted grief of a mother losing her child. The wedding day arrived with golden sunshine and flower petals scattered on marble steps. The princess was radiant. Attis stood at the altar, finally ready to claim a love that didn't carry the weight of cosmic wrongness. But Cybele was watching, always watching. And gods, as you learn, do not share. Cybele drove everyone to insanity at the wedding, but that clinical description doesn't capture the horror of what unfolded. Picture this. One moment, a joyous celebration. The next, screaming chaos as divine madness descended like a plague. The bride began clawing at her own face, convinced her reflection was lying to her. Wedding guests turned on each other with ceremonial knives, seeing enemies where friends had stood moments before. The music twisted into discordant shrieks that seemed to come from the very stones. And Attis, beautiful Attis, felt his mother's curse take root in his mind like poison ivy growing through his thoughts. But what Cybele did to her own son was worse than madness. It was justice, divine and terrible. In his divine frenzy, driven mad by his mother's jealous rage, Attis performed an act so shocking it echoes through mythology to this day. The goddess drove him into a mad frenzy, which caused him to castrate himself. There, beneath the pine trees that would become his eternal symbol, the most beautiful being in creation destroyed his own manhood with a sacred blade. His blood soaked into the earth, and where it fell, violets bloomed, purple as bruises, beautiful as remorse. He died there, in that grove, but death, for those touched by divine love, is never quite the end. According to Ovid's Metamorphosis, Attis transformed himself into a pine tree. But this wasn't just any transformation. This was a metamorphosis born of ultimate violation, a son's final escape from a mother's possessive love. The pine became sacred to Cybele, carried in her festivals as a reminder of what her love could do. Every spring, as the tree budded with new life, it whispered the same question: where does protection end and possession begin? Cybele wept for centuries,
Her tears carved new rivers through the mountains. But she kept the pine close, always. Some forms of love, it seems, survive even death. And that's not even the strangest part of this story.
If you're still here, you walk among the rare few who seek the shadows behind our sanitized myths. Hit that subscribe button before they decide this knowledge is too dangerous to share. Here's what the history books won't tell you. Initiates into the eunuch priesthood of Cybele, known as Galai, reenacted this myth with an act of self-castration. For over 1,000 years, young men would castrate themselves in religious frenzy, believing they were honoring the god who chose mutilation over betraying his divine mother. Imagine the power of a story so compelling that men would destroy their own bodies to live it. This wasn't just mythology. This was collective trauma played out in temple courtyards across the ancient world.
The most chilling part, the deliberate erasure. While Zeus's affairs filled epic poems and Aphrodite's loves inspired countless artworks, Cybele's story with Attis was systematically buried. Temples were abandoned. Statues were defaced. Priests who knew the full tale disappeared. The Romans tried to sanitize it, calling Attis simply Cybele's companion or consort. But in the older, darker texts, the ones hidden in monastery basements and private collections, the truth still whispers. He was her son first, her lover second, and her victim always. Why would they work so hard to hide this story? What about divine incest was so threatening that it had to be erased from collective memory? Deep in the archives of forgotten libraries, fragments remain. Ancient graffiti scratched into temple walls. The mother loves too much. Warnings carved into milestone markers. Do not dream of the pine grove. Medical papyri describing a condition called Attis madness, young men who castrated themselves after claiming to see the Great Mother in their dreams. These aren't just historical curiosities. They're evidence of a story so psychologically powerful it could drive people to self-destruction just by hearing it. But here's the question that will haunt you. Was Cybele the villain of this tale, or was she herself a victim of divine nature, too terrible to control? They say those who seek out her true name in the deepest research libraries report the same experience. Dreams of pine needles falling like tears. The sound of drums that beat in rhythm with their own heartbeat, and a woman's voice calling from somewhere far beneath the earth. Modern scholars who study her cult report unusually high rates of personal tragedy, marriages that collapse suddenly, sons who cut contact with their mothers for no reason they can explain, pine trees that die overnight in their yards. Coincidence? Perhaps. But ancient curses, like ancient loves, have a way of reaching across centuries.
Let me ask you something that will keep you awake tonight. If gods experience love, what happens when that love becomes corrupt, when protective instinct becomes possessive obsession, when a mother's devotion crosses every boundary that should exist? Cybele's crime wasn't loving her son. It was loving him in a way that destroyed the very thing she sought to protect. She turned him from a person into a possession, from a son into an object of desire. And when he tried to escape, she chose to destroy him rather than lose him. Sound familiar? This pattern echoes through every relationship where love becomes caged, where protection becomes control.
Listen closely. In the deepest part of night, when the boundary between myth and reality grows thin, you can almost hear her voice rising from the old temple ruins. I created him from my own divine essence. Every curve of his face reflected my own perfection. How could I not love what I had made so beautiful? How could I let some mortal girl claim what belonged to me by right of creation? I screamed for centuries after he died. I called his name until mountains cracked. I bled through temples where no one dares to pray anymore. They say I am cruel, that I am monster, but they do not understand. I am not gone. I am not forgiven. I am buried, but I am awake. And every mother who loves too fiercely carries a fragment of my curse.
Even now, 3,000 years later, her myth moves through our world like a shadow that has learned to walk upright. Therapists recognize the pattern. The possessive parent who destroys what they claim to protect. The love that devours rather than nourishes. Every mother who says no one will ever love you like I do channels Cybele's voice. Every son who feels suffocated by maternal devotion walks in Attis's footsteps. The myth lives because the psychological truth it reveals is eternal. Love without boundaries becomes indistinguishable from hate. Here's what they don't want you to know. The story isn't over. In archaeological digs across Turkey, they keep finding pine cones buried beneath Christian churches as if something was trying to push up through the newer foundations. Ancient coins surface with Cybele's face, but the features keep changing in each discovery, as if her appearance shifts with each generation's fears. You can forget a name, bury a temple, silence a priest, but you cannot kill a truth that lives in the human heart. The boundary between love and possession, between protection and destruction, between mother and monster, that line exists in every relationship, waiting to be crossed.
Next week, we enter the house of Kronos, the god who ate his own children, and you'll discover why some hungers can never be satisfied, only fed.
If you feel the chill of recognition, if something in this tale made your blood run cold with familiarity, then you understand why this knowledge was buried. Hit subscribe, because what's hidden in divine silence will rise again. And maybe, just maybe, you'll help decide whether these ancient warnings should stay buried, or whether the world needs to remember what happens when love becomes curse. The pine trees are listening. They always have been.